My sister pointed at my fiancée. "She's cheating on you," she screamed back. "Liar." The house fell silent. Then they fought. I still remember that evening in my parents' house as if it had been carved into my memory with a knife. The kitchen smelled of roasted chicken and herbs, my mother bustling around with that nervous energy she always carried when all of us were together under one roof. The table was crowded with dishes, laughter, and the small tension that always seemed to hang when my sister Sophie and my fiancée Claire were in the same room. They were polite to each other most of the time, but there was always an undercurrent. I thought it was normal, two strong personalities not meshing. I told myself it was nothing more than that. That night proved me wrong. Dinner started well enough. My father asked about my work. Claire told one of her little stories about a coworker, and Sophie, quiet as ever, just picked at her food. She had this way of sitting through conversations like she was watching a play, measuring every word, waiting for the right moment to strike. I caught her glancing at Claire more than once, her jaw tightening each time. The moment came faster than I could have predicted. Claire had just reached across the table for the salad bowl, smiling in that effortless way she used to win people over, when Sophie's fork clattered against her plate. The sound cut through the room like glass shattering. Everyone stopped talking. My mother froze with the serving spoon in her hand. My father looked up, eyebrows raised. And then Sophie said it. "She's cheating on you." There wasn't a pause or hesitation. Just those 4 words, sharp as a blade, thrown into the center of the table. For a second I thought I had misheard. My father coughed, my mother dropped the spoon, and Claire's face went white before flushing red. Then the denial came like fire. Claire shot up from her chair so fast it toppled backward, her voice ringing through the room. She called Sophie a liar. Her tone wasn't the fragile kind of denial, but an aggressive one, the type that tries to kill the accusation by burning it down immediately. She shouted that Sophie had hated her since the first day, that Sophie never wanted me to be happy, that this was just her way of sabotaging what we had. The house fell into silence. I felt every pair of eyes swing toward me. My parents waiting, Claire glaring, Sophie sitting stiff with her arms crossed, her words hanging in the air like smoke. My mind raced. I wanted to demand evidence, proof, anything beyond a sudden outburst. But instead, I found myself muttering a defense for Claire. Something about Sophie being mistaken. Something about her being jealous, or maybe just misinterpreting things. Sophie's expression didn't change. She only repeated, slower this time, that Claire wasn't who I thought she was. The tension snapped when Claire lunged. It wasn't just shouting anymore. She shoved the table aside and went straight for Sophie, hands grabbing at her hair. Sophie fought back just as hard, knocking over glasses, sending plates crashing to the floor. The sound of it all, glass breaking, my mother screaming, chairs scraping, was chaos in its purest form. I jumped up, pulling Claire away while my father restrained Sophie. Claire's face was twisted with fury, eyes wild, while Sophie's lip bled where Claire had scratched her. The two of them screamed over each other, voices overlapping. Sophie insisting she was protecting me, Claire calling her jealous and pathetic. I stood between them, my arms holding Claire back, my head pounding from the noise. When the shouting finally died, the silence that replaced it was worse. My mother quietly cleaned the broken glass, my father muttered that this was disgraceful, and Sophie stormed out of the dining room without looking at me once. Claire shook with anger in my arms, muttering that Sophie had always hated her, that this was just her way of breaking us up. I told myself I believed her. At least, I tried. I convinced myself Sophie was overprotective, maybe too invested in my life, and that she had crossed a line tonight. Claire cried into my chest later when we left, whispering about how humiliating it had been, how she didn't know if she could face my family again. I promised her it would be fine, that Sophie would calm down eventually. But when I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I replayed the way Sophie had said it. Not screaming, not emotional, just blunt, almost cold. Like she wasn't making a guess, but stating a fact. That was the first crack in the foundation. I ignored it, patched it over with excuses, but the silence in the house after her accusation kept echoing in my head. My parents didn't call that night. Sophie didn't text me. No one followed up. It was like we had all agreed to bury the night under silence. Except silence has a way of making words louder. The following days were strange. Claire carried herself as if nothing had happened, but I could see the tension in her shoulders whenever my phone buzzed. She was overly affectionate, too eager to prove herself, cooking dinner for me every night, talking about honeymoon destinations as if nothing could be wrong. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to drown out Sophie's voice. But it lingered. Every time I replayed the dinner scene in my mind, one detail bothered me most. Claire's first reaction hadn't been confusion. She hadn't asked what Sophie meant or who she was accusing her of being with. She had gone straight to rage, straight to attack. and the way her face had drained of color before the anger took over. That image replayed over and over in my mind. Still, I chose denial. I told myself Sophie was wrong, that my fiancé loved me, that one heated accusation didn't mean anything. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. I had sided with Claire in front of everyone, and in doing so, I had pushed Sophie away. That was the cost of my loyalty. The question that began to haunt me was whether I had given that loyalty to the wrong person. That night at dinner was the beginning of everything. It was the spark that lit a fire I couldn't put out. I didn't know it then, but the accusation wouldn't fade. It would grow, fester, and bleed into every part of my life. The house had fallen silent after Sophie's words, but the silence wasn't peace. It was the kind that waits before a storm breaks. And the storm was coming. The morning after the fight, I went through the motions of normal life. Work, coffee, small talk with coworkers, but none of it felt normal. The night kept replaying in my head, a loop that I couldn't shut off. Sophie's words sat in my mind like an unanswered question. Claire's anger had drowned them out in the moment, but when I stripped away the noise, the silence whispered something else. At first, I tried to dismiss it. Claire had always been fiery, quick to react when cornered. That didn't make her guilty. But Sophie, she wasn't reckless with her words. She wasn't the type to invent drama. If she had spoken, she must have believed it. And that thought refused to leave me. Claire pretended everything was fine. That week, she went out of her way to cook dinners, send me affectionate texts, and drop hints about our honeymoon. She bought candles for the apartment, suggested spontaneous date nights, even brought me lunch at work. On the surface, it looked like love. But beneath the gestures, I began noticing details I had ignored before. Her phone was always locked, always face down. When messages came, she swiped them away instantly, claiming they were work notifications. Her explanations for being late had a rehearsed edge, too smooth, like she'd practiced them. Once, when I mentioned Sophie's name, her face hardened just for a second before she laughed it off. Small cracks, easy to overlook, but after Sophie's accusation, they grew sharper. The first real seed of suspicion came 2 nights later. Claire told me she had a late meeting at work. She left dressed in a way that didn't match her story. Fitted dress, heels, carefully done hair. It didn't look like she was preparing for a meeting. It looked like she was preparing for a date. I brushed it off at first, but when she returned hours later smelling faintly of wine, I felt the unease settle deeper in my stomach. I wanted to ask. I wanted to demand the truth right then. But Sophie's outburst at dinner played in my head. If I asked too soon, Claire would just explode again, deny everything, and I'd be left with nothing. I needed more than suspicion. I needed something undeniable. The next day, Sophie didn't answer my calls. When I finally drove over to my parents' house, she avoided me, slipping out before I could talk to her. My mother shook her head and told me Sophie felt betrayed, that I had humiliated her by taking Claire's side. My father said I should keep family matters in the family and stop chasing drama. Neither of them looked me in the eyes when they spoke. I left with the sick feeling that no one would help me. If there was truth to Sophie's accusation, I was on my own. That night, when Claire fell asleep, I sat awake again. My mind raced through possibilities, scenarios, excuses. It was then, almost as if on cue, that my phone buzzed. An unknown number. A short message. Ask her where she was last Thursday. That was it. No name, no explanation. Just a sentence. My chest tightened. Thursday. I knew that day. She had told me she was out with coworkers, some casual dinner. I had believed it without question. Now the memory twisted into something darker. I didn't reply to the message. Instead, I stared at it until the screen dimmed, then deleted it before Claire could see. The detective in me woke up. I couldn't rely on Sophie's accusations or anonymous texts. I needed evidence. Real evidence. The first step was simple. Pay attention. I started keeping mental notes of Claire's movements, her excuses, her clothes, her moods. She became more erratic the more I observed. Some nights, she returned home glowing, humming, pouring herself wine. Other nights, she came back irritable, dismissive, retreating straight to the shower. She claimed stress from work, but the pattern didn't match the job I knew she had. Then came the slip. One evening, she tossed her purse onto the couch before rushing into the bedroom. I don't know what possessed me, but I reached into the bag, my hands shaking. My fingers brushed receipts, makeup, keys, and then I pulled out a folded piece of paper. A hotel receipt. The date hit me first. Last Thursday. The location was a downtown hotel, not far from where I worked. Dinner for 2 at the attached restaurant, drinks included, and a room booked for the night. My chest went cold. There was no possible way to explain that as a work meeting. I shoved the receipt back just as Claire returned, humming as she pulled her hair into a bun. She smiled at me like nothing was wrong, asked what I wanted for dinner, and kissed me on the cheek. I nodded mutely, my mind screaming behind my calm face. That was the moment the truth became undeniable. Sophie hadn't been reckless. She had been right. But knowing wasn't enough. I couldn't walk into the living room and throw the receipt on the table. Claire would twist it, spin it, find a way to turn it back on me. She had already proven how quickly she could attack when cornered. If I wanted to end this without destroying myself in the process, I needed more than a scrap of paper. I needed to see it with my own eyes. That night, lying beside her as she scrolled on her phone, I made a decision. I would stop being passive. I would watch, listen, and wait until the moment came to strike. The chance came faster than expected. 3 days later, Claire said she had another late meeting. This time I played along, acting distracted, even encouraging her. I kissed her goodbye, watched her leave, and then waited 5 minutes before grabbing my jacket and following. The city streets at night are full of secrets. I trailed her cab at a distance, my heart pounding with every red light. She didn't head toward her office. Instead, the cab wound its way downtown, straight toward the same hotel listed on the receipt. I parked half a block away and watched as she stepped out, her coat pulled tight, her heels clicking across the pavement. She entered the hotel lobby with the ease of someone who had been there before. I didn't follow her inside. Not yet. I sat in my car, staring at the glowing windows, the pulse of neon, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I had all but confirmed it. But confirmation wasn't the same as exposure. Not yet. Later that night, Claire came home cheerful, carrying a small shopping bag she claimed was from a boutique. She kissed me as if nothing had happened. I smiled back, the mask glued to my face. Inside, my mind churned with plans. I had the receipt. I had her lies. Now I had the sight of her walking into the hotel. Each piece added to the picture Sophie had painted for me at the dinner table. And yet, the most painful part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing how close I had come to dismissing it entirely. If Sophie hadn't spoken, I might have stayed blind forever. That thought kept me awake until dawn. The next morning, Sophie finally texted me. One line. You're starting to see it, aren't you? I didn't answer. But she was right. The hotel receipt had been the spark, but following Claire to the hotel made the fire real. I could no longer pretend Sophie's words at dinner had been the rant of an overprotective sister. Still, I felt paralyzed. Proof wasn't the same as exposure. If I confronted Claire without more, she'd twist it. She was clever, sharper than most gave her credit for, and if I stumbled, she'd bury me under her outrage. So I waited. That weekend, she told me she was going to a friend's birthday. She dressed carefully, her perfume heavy, her eyes glowing with that practiced charm. I watched her leave and then trailed her again, this time with a determination that stiffened my spine. Her taxi didn't head toward the supposed friend's apartment. It went to the other side of the city, to a quiet neighborhood cafe tucked off a side street. I parked across from the entrance and waited. 5 minutes later, a man arrived. He wasn't a stranger. My stomach turned as I recognized him. Martin. He was someone I had met before, at a mutual gathering through Claire's circle. He had shaken my hand, smiled politely, laughed at small talk. I remembered his face clearly, not because he stood out, but because he seemed so ordinary. Now, watching Claire greet him with a hug that lingered too long, their hands brushing as they walked inside, that ordinariness curdled into something sinister. I didn't storm in. Not yet. I sat in the car, staring through the glass, watching as they leaned close over coffee, their heads bent in a way that screamed intimacy. At one point, she reached across the table and touched his hand. He didn't pull away. My chest felt like it was caving in, every second hammering home what I had refused to believe. After an hour, they left together, walking side by side toward the street. I forced myself to stay hidden, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. When they parted with a kiss near the corner, quick but unmistakable, something inside me finally snapped. I couldn't pretend anymore. That night, when Claire returned home, I didn't wait. She slipped off her coat, humming softly, setting her bag on the counter. I stepped into the kitchen and asked her where she had been. She froze for half a second before answering. She said she'd been at her friend's party. Her voice was calm, too calm, rehearsed. I pressed further, asked what the friend's name was. She gave it without hesitation, even adding details about the food, the music, the people she had supposedly seen. Every word was a lie. I told her I had seen her. I didn't mention Martin's name, not yet, but I said I had followed her and watched her. For a moment her face faltered, the mask slipping, the tiniest crack. Then she exploded, turning on me with the same fury she'd shown Sophie. She accused me of not trusting her, of being paranoid, of stalking her like some kind of madman. She said love required trust, that I was violating her privacy, that Sophie had poisoned me against her. Her voice rose higher and higher until she was nearly screaming. But here's what struck me most. She never once asked what I had seen. She never asked what I thought I knew. Instead, she went straight to defense, to rage, to deflection. I didn't argue back. Not much. I let her rant, let her burn herself out. Then I simply walked away. She followed me down the hall, still shouting, but I shut the bedroom door between us. For the first time, I felt distance. Not just emotional, real distance, a wall I didn't plan to tear down. The next morning, Sophie called me. Her voice was sharp, colder than I'd ever heard it. She told me she had stayed away because I hadn't believed her. But she couldn't stay silent anymore. She said she knew who it was. Her words hit me like a punch. She named Martin. She said she had seen them herself, weeks ago, and had stayed quiet at first because she thought maybe it was innocent. But then she saw them again, not once, but twice. And the way they acted left no doubt. I told her I had seen them too. The silence on the line stretched, heavy with the weight of confirmation. But Sophie wasn't finished. She told me something worse. Something that made my blood run cold. According to her, Claire had been planning more than an affair. She had been bragging to a friend, someone Sophie trusted enough to believe, that once the wedding was over, she'd be set for life. That she didn't love me, not really, but marrying me would give her financial security, status, and a comfortable future. The plan was simple: tie herself legally to me, then slowly edge me out while keeping half of everything. It wasn't just betrayal of love. It was calculation. A scheme. Hearing Sophie say it crystallized everything. Claire's sudden affection after the dinner fight, the over-the-top gestures, the way she tried to smother my doubts. It wasn't guilt. It was strategy. She was playing the role until the contract was signed. I felt sick. The following days blurred together. Claire acted as if nothing had changed. She spoke about wedding invitations, called vendors, showed me pictures of floral arrangements. Each smile she gave me felt like a blade slipping between my ribs. At night, I pretended to sleep while she texted quietly beside me. Once, I opened my eyes just enough to see her typing with a small smile, her phone tilted away from me. My fists clenched, but I didn't move. I was waiting. I began gathering what I had. The receipt. Notes of dates and times she had been working late. Mental snapshots of her meetings with Martin. Sophie's testimony. Piece by piece, I was building a wall she wouldn't be able to climb over. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed witnesses. I needed the truth to come out in front of others, where her rage and lies couldn't smother it. The storm Sophie had warned me about was gathering. Then, one night, Claire slipped. She thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I lay still as she whispered into her phone, her voice soft, intimate, a tone I hadn't heard directed at me in months. She told Martin she missed him. She said things would change soon, that I was too focused on the wedding to notice anything. She laughed quietly, a sound that turned my stomach. That was the final piece. I didn't need to hear more. I lay there, my heart pounding, my mind clear for the first time in weeks. The plan was no longer about suspicion or proof. It was about exposure. I knew what had to be done. The night I overheard Claire whispering to Martin on the phone, the decision solidified in my mind. I wasn't going to drag this out. I wasn't going to let her pull me deeper into her net of lies, only to spring it once vows were exchanged and signatures dried. She had already shown what she was capable of: rage when cornered, manipulation when doubted, and cold calculation when she thought she was safe. If I confronted her privately, she'd scream, deny, maybe even twist it to make me the villain. But if I brought the truth into the open, in front of witnesses, she wouldn't have anywhere to run. The opportunity came sooner than I thought. My parents planned a small family gathering the following weekend. A casual dinner, just us, meant to smooth things over after the chaos of the last one. Claire was eager to attend, insisting it would be the perfect chance to prove to my family that Sophie's accusations were baseless. The irony of her excitement was almost unbearable. I told Sophie in advance. She didn't hesitate. She agreed to back me when the time came. The dinner started quietly, tension running beneath the surface. My mother flitted around nervously, trying to keep conversation flowing. My father sat stiff at the head of the table, sipping wine, eyes darting between us. Sophie was silent, her gaze fixed on Claire, sharp as glass. Claire, meanwhile, was all smiles. She complimented my mother's cooking, told a story about a wedding planner mishap, and laughed a little too loudly at my father's dry jokes. She was performing. I sat through it all, calm, waiting. My pocket felt heavy with the folded hotel receipt, the printed phone records I had managed to pull from her carelessly synced email account, and the screenshots Sophie had given me of Claire's bragging messages to her so-called friends. Each piece was stacked in my mind like ammunition. Halfway through dinner, as dessert was being set on the table, I spoke. I started calmly, thanking everyone for being there. I said I wanted honesty tonight. No shouting, no more secrets. Claire smiled, thinking I was about to defend her again. Then I set the hotel receipt on the table. The room froze. I explained what it was. The date. The location. The dinner for two. The overnight stay. My voice didn't rise. It stayed measured, steady, each word cutting sharper than a scream ever could. Claire's smile cracked. She reached for the paper, but Sophie snatched it up first, reading it aloud so everyone could hear. My mother gasped. My father muttered something under his breath, his eyes narrowing. Claire launched into denial. She claimed it was a work dinner, that the room had been booked by mistake, that she had never even stayed. She spoke fast, words tumbling over each other, her voice rising higher with every sentence. Then I pulled out the phone records. The calls to Martin late at night, the text with his number saved under a false name. I didn't read them aloud. I simply slid them across the table. Sophie leaned forward, her eyes flicking over the pages before she looked directly at Claire. "Still a work dinner?" she asked, her voice like steel. That was when Claire snapped. She slammed her hand on the table, shouting that this was an ambush, that Sophie had always hated her, that I was pathetic for letting my sister manipulate me. She stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, and pointed at Sophie, her voice cracking with fury. But this time, Sophie didn't back down. She stood too, meeting Claire's fury head-on. She repeated what she had told me earlier, that Claire had bragged about her plan, that she had never loved me, that marrying me was just a strategy for security. The words hit like thunder. Claire lunged again, shoving Sophie, her face twisted with rage. My father jumped up to separate them, my mother shrieked, and I remained seated, watching as the mask Claire had worn so carefully shattered in front of everyone. Her shrill denial, her wild gestures, the way she clawed at Sophie's arm, it all painted a clearer picture than any document I could provide. When my father finally pulled her back, I rose. I told her it was over. The wedding, the engagement, everything. I said it in the same calm tone I'd started with, and that quiet finality cut deeper than her own screaming ever could. For a moment, she froze. Then, in a desperate lunge, she turned toward me, pleading. Her voice dropped, her tears suddenly real, begging me to believe her. She swore Sophie was lying, that I was ruining everything for nothing. But the room wasn't hers anymore. My parents, Sophie, even the silence itself, everything stood against her. When she realized she couldn't win, her expression hardened. The tears dried instantly. She spat a curse at Sophie, grabbed her bag, and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The house fell into silence once more. But this silence was different. It wasn't tense or uncertain. It was the silence of finality, of something breaking and ending all at once. The aftermath was messy. Claire tried to call me dozens of times over the next few days. She sent long texts alternating between rage and sorrow, threats and apologies. At one point, she claimed she was pregnant, but when pressed, she admitted it was a lie. Her desperation bled through every message. When I blocked her, she turned to my parents, trying to sway them. They refused to take her calls. She reached out to mutual friends, spinning stories about Sophie sabotaging our relationship. But by then, word had spread. People whispered about her affair with Martin, about her scheme, about how she had been exposed. Her social circle thinned rapidly. As for Martin, he didn't stick around. Once everything came to light, he vanished. Whether he had been serious about her or just enjoyed the thrill, I never found out. He stopped answering her calls, blocked her on social media, and left her to face the fallout alone. Claire lost everything in a matter of weeks. The engagement, her social standing, her supposed safety net. She moved out of her apartment when her landlord raised the rent and was last seen working a low-paying job in a different part of the city. The consequences for me were different. I had to face my own guilt. The guilt of not believing Sophie at first, of defending Claire and pushing my sister away. Sophie forgave me, though it took time. She admitted she had almost given up on me, convinced I would walk into disaster willingly. But once she saw me take action, once she saw me expose Claire for what she was, she stood by me again. Our bond became stronger, forged in the fire of betrayal. My parents, too, shifted. They were angry at first that I had let things go so far, but once they saw Claire's true colors, their frustration turned into quiet pride. My father told me one evening that he admired how I had kept calm during the exposure, how I hadn't let rage dictate my actions. That meant more than he realized. But the biggest consequence was internal. I had walked to the edge of a trap and nearly fallen in. If not for Sophie, I would have tied myself to someone who saw me as nothing more than a paycheck and a stepping stone. I would have been devoured slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of me but resentment and regret. Instead, I walked away. Scarred, yes, but free. Months later, Sophie and I sat together in a cafe, the same kind of place where I had once watched Claire with Martin. The memory still stung, but sitting across from my sister, I felt something else. Gratitude. She had spoken when no one else dared. She had screamed the truth into a room where I refused to see it. And for that, I owed her everything. As for Claire, I never saw her again. But every so often, I hear whispers, from old acquaintances, from friends of friends, about how she struggles now, how her schemes never quite work the way she wants them to. And each time, I feel the same quiet relief. The storm had come. It had torn through my life, ripping away illusions and shattering trust. But in its wake, it left something stronger. The truth. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day. And trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.